The last thing I expected to see was my roommate dropping the final box into the trunk of her car, closing it with trembling hands, then suddenly turning around and sprinting back toward me with tears streaming down her face. Before I could whisper a single goodbye, she wrapped her arms around me and kissed me with the kind of desperate honesty that only comes when someone realizes they are about to lose the person who quietly became their home. In that single heartbeat, every lonely night, every shared meal, every silent sacrifice, and every unspoken feeling crashed into one unforgettable moment that changed both of our lives forever. Before we continue, if stories about kindness, love, and second chances touch your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these heartfelt stories reach more people, and every second chance begins with one small act of kindness. When I first met Emily, she wasn't smiling. She stood in the doorway of our tiny apartment holding 2 old suitcases and one worn backpack that looked heavier than everything else she carried. She apologized for arriving late even though she wasn't late at all. Her eyes looked exhausted, as if life had spent years teaching her that she should apologize simply for existing. I had rented out the spare room because my own bills had become impossible to manage after losing my father and watching medical expenses drain every dollar I had saved. I thought I needed a roommate to survive financially. I never imagined I needed one emotionally even more. The apartment was painfully ordinary. The walls were thin, the kitchen barely had enough room for 2 people, and the old heater made strange noises every winter night. Yet somehow that cramped little place slowly became a refuge from the outside world. Emily worked long shifts at a neighborhood bookstore before taking evening classes, while I spent my days repairing computers and my nights trying to convince myself that life would eventually become easier. We crossed paths mostly in the kitchen, making coffee before sunrise or heating leftovers after dark. At first our conversations lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes slowly became hours. We laughed about burned dinners, argued over terrible movies, celebrated tiny victories, and learned each other's routines so naturally that silence between us eventually felt more comforting than words. Months passed, and the apartment began carrying our fingerprints everywhere. A small plant she rescued from a discount shelf started growing beside the window. My father's old record player, which had gathered dust for years, filled the evenings with soft music because she insisted every home deserved a soundtrack. We created traditions without realizing it. Friday became homemade pizza night. Sunday mornings belonged to coffee and books. Whenever one of us had a difficult day, the other somehow knew without asking and quietly left a favorite snack on the kitchen counter. Nothing about our friendship seemed extraordinary from the outside, yet those ordinary moments slowly stitched together 2 broken hearts. Emily rarely talked about the past, but grief has a way of revealing itself even through silence. Sometimes I heard her crying behind her bedroom door long after midnight. Sometimes she stared at family photographs before placing them face down on the table. One rainy evening she finally admitted that she had walked away from people who measured love by success instead of compassion. She had spent years trying to become someone else just to earn acceptance, until one day she realized loneliness inside a crowded family felt worse than loneliness alone. I understood that feeling better than she knew. Losing my father had taught me that grief doesn't only arrive when someone dies. Sometimes it arrives when relationships slowly disappear while everyone is still alive. Our friendship became the quiet foundation neither of us realized we depended upon. When I caught the flu, Emily missed classes to make soup and remind me to take medicine. When she failed an important exam, I stayed awake helping her study until sunrise. We never kept score. Kindness simply became the language we spoke every day. Neighbors assumed we had known each other forever, yet less than a year earlier we had been complete strangers brought together by rent payments and coincidence. Looking back now, I don't believe coincidence had anything to do with it. Then everything changed on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Emily walked into the apartment carrying an envelope instead of groceries. She smiled, but her smile looked fragile. She had been offered her dream position with a publishing company in another city. It was the opportunity she had spent years chasing, the kind of chance that only comes once in a lifetime. I congratulated her immediately because I truly meant it. Still, after she returned to her room, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at 2 coffee mugs, suddenly realizing that one of them would soon remain untouched every morning. I hated myself for feeling sad about something wonderful happening to someone I cared about. The following weeks disappeared faster than either of us expected. Cardboard boxes slowly replaced furniture. Empty shelves echoed through the apartment. Every packed photograph and folded blanket reminded me that time was running out. We pretended everything was normal because admitting the truth felt too painful. Instead of talking about goodbye, we discussed moving companies, apartment deposits, and weather forecasts. We convinced ourselves practical conversations were easier than emotional ones, even though both of us knew exactly what we were avoiding. The night before she left, the electricity failed during a summer storm. We lit candles across the apartment and sat on the floor eating melting ice cream before it spoiled. Rain tapped softly against the windows while the city disappeared into darkness. Without television, phones, or distractions, we simply existed together. That quiet evening somehow said everything neither of us could put into words. For the first time in months, I realized that home had never been the apartment itself. Home had been the person sitting beside me in the candlelight. Morning arrived too quickly. The moving truck was loaded piece by piece until only one small box remained. Emily carried it downstairs while I stood outside pretending to admire the clear sky instead of fighting tears. She placed the final box inside the trunk and closed it gently. I forced myself to smile because I wanted her last memory of me to be hopeful instead of heartbroken. She walked toward the driver's door, paused with her hand on the handle, then suddenly froze. For several endless seconds she stared at the apartment building, then at me, as though her heart had started arguing with her mind. Without warning she turned around and ran. She crossed the driveway so quickly that one of her shoes nearly slipped off. Before I understood what was happening, she threw her arms around me, buried her face against my shoulder, and kissed me with every emotion we had buried beneath months of polite silence. It wasn't a perfect movie kiss. We were both crying too hard for perfection. It was simply honest. Honest enough to erase every fear that had kept us quiet for so long. In that embrace we finally understood that the greatest love stories often begin with friendship, patience, and countless unnoticed acts of kindness. Life did not suddenly become easy after that day. Long-distance relationships demanded courage neither of us knew we possessed. There were missed trains, delayed flights, lonely evenings, and moments when giving up seemed easier than believing. Yet every challenge reminded us why that goodbye had become a beginning instead of an ending. We had learned that real love isn't measured by distance or convenience. It grows stronger through trust, sacrifice, and the willingness to choose each other again and again. If this story has touched your heart so far, please support the video by liking it, sharing it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribing to Ripple of Kindness. Stories like this remind us that hope often arrives when we least expect it. Before the ending, tell us in the comments, have you ever realized someone's true value only when you were about to lose them? Years later, people still ask us when we first fell in love. They expect an unforgettable date or a carefully planned confession. Instead, we smile and remember an old apartment, a tiny kitchen, a trunk filled with moving boxes, and one impossible goodbye that became the beginning of forever. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't happen when someone walks into your life. They happen when someone is walking away, then suddenly turns around because love is simply too important to leave behind. That unexpected kiss reminded us that kindness creates connections, friendship builds trust, and courage transforms ordinary moments into lifelong memories. Never be afraid to tell someone they matter, because tomorrow is never guaranteed, but one honest moment today can change an entire lifetime.